Hi, Fred. How you doing? Okay, so it's 7 o'clock on Thursday, September 4th. We'll call the Wilton Board of Education regular meeting to order. Has everyone had a chance to look at the agenda? Are there any questions or comments on the agenda? Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Heather. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Pam. All in favor? Carries unanimously. Comments from the public? Oh gosh, I'm sorry. That was awful.
Comment from the public. They're calling you directly on your phone.
DeLuca has a comment.
That's happened to me as well.
Libby ate my last cinnamon roll. That's where we were before we got here. The board has set aside time at the beginning and end of regular meetings for public comments for the members of the public to share their views on matters involving the Wilton Public Schools and to help inform the board's decisions on such matters. 2 minutes will be allotted to each speaker and a maximum of 15 minutes to any one subject. For the record, please also give your name and address. The board considers the views of citizens in its deliberations and welcomes and appreciates public comment. The board listens to public comment thoughtfully and with interest. The board, however, generally does not respond to public comment during board meetings by offering commentary or asking questions. The board also invites commentators and the public to contact the board or the superintendent directly with any specific questions or comments. The board, through the chair and the superintendent, may respond to questions and comments offered during public comment or shared directly. And in responding, may also direct members of the public to the appropriate staff member for a response. Are there any comments from the public? Hearing none. Consent agenda. There are 2 items on the consent agenda, policy 5141.7, external heat illness awareness for intramural and interscholastic athletics. The change is just a recoding to 4115.4. And then regulation 5141.72, concussion management and training for athletic coaches. Again, the change is just a recoding from 4115.2. Are there any questions or comments about the consent agenda? Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion.
Thank you, Pat. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Lori. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Board Chair's report. I'd just like to say a quick thank you and congratulations from everybody who has walked through our building since school opened last week. From teachers, staff, parents, kids, custodians, the whole educational community. This opening has started with such great success. And there is a buzz and a vibrancy in all our buildings, and everyone has jumped back in. And we'll see later tonight with our testing reports that we're on solid footing, and we're all just really looking forward to a really successful partnership throughout the entire year. So we just want to give a big thank you to everyone, even noting that the buses seem to be running on time. And
They're pretty. They're so pretty.
yeah.
We love a shiny, clean bus.
Shiny yellow bus. Whoa.
So just recognition and appreciation to everybody across the entire community. So thank you very much.
Great. Was it only last week that school started?
I know.
I know.
I feel like we're in it. So.
We're in it.
A couple of things. If you saw your email from me this morning, we learned yesterday, from good news from Lila, that our federal title funds were restored. So that's great news. You may remember at this time last year, I was scratching my head because I could not figure out how the what is it called? The small area income poverty estimate was generated, and nobody seemed to have a clear answer. There's a 2% threshold that stipulates you get money or you don't. And apparently last year we fell below it. This year we're back above it. And so, maybe I shouldn't ask questions. Not that there's someone to answer them, but it's good news. We received $46,045 in Title I funds. Those funds are really intended to support instruction for underserved students. We received another $41,941 in Title II funds. those funds also are intended to support professional learning for teachers to support our underserved students. And lastly, we received $9,520 in Title III funds. Those are directed to support our multi-language learners. So that's really good news, and hopefully that will continue in subsequent years. Just wanted to notify you all, a date will be forthcoming to do an afternoon ribbon cutting for the new Business and Innovation Center up at the high school. So we've just got to coordinate some calendars and make sure we get our donors there, and that'll be something to look forward to. I also want to remind everybody, you all have the invitations in your mailbox, and anyone who may be listening at home, next Tuesday the 9th, we're having a long-range planning session. We have Jonathan Costa from Ed Advance coming down, so we're hoping to get from our staff, from the rest of the community, to come and spend a little time with us talking about a vision for our facilities, which, as I explained to you earlier, will be fed to the architect who is developing ed specs, and then that'll go on to the facilities committee and hopefully lay the groundwork for a much clearer plan moving forward. Last, the consent agenda, the policies that are recoded, that was part of the recommendations from the audit that CABE conducted of our policy manual this summer. And so we just got that about a month ago. I've been going through it. According to CABE, 81% of our policies are exactly as they should be, and then the remainder need a little bit of updating or tweaking. And the two categories are primarily, some policies are 10 years old or older, and so there have been legislative changes, and the legislative changes need to be updated at the bottom. And then the second category are just the new mandated policies, and so we're going to be looking at two of those tonight, and we've got a small handful that we'll need to work through through the policy committee, and then moving forward later this fall. That's it.
Thank you very much. I look forward to that ribbon cutting. I was in that classroom. It's pretty fantastic.
That's great.
Yeah.
How did that come to be? Did I miss that whole?
So Bianca Diorio,
I met her.
Her brainchild.
She was lovely.
yes, she can teach. So
Yes.
she's a Wilton High alumna. So was working in the private sector, I think in finance, several years ago. Decided that she wanted to teach, and so we were lucky enough to scoop her up. At some point last year, she approached the PTA looking for a grant to reimagine that space. She had some ideas about extending personal finance, creating a student-run investment fund, doing some other things. And so the PTA landed in my office, and then I called our fairy godparents, the Straub family and the Boucher family, and they very generously
Got it. Okay.
funded.
I was just curious how, because it's a beautiful room, and she's a lovely person.
Yes.
I'm very excited about it. And she went here.
She's a graduate.
Yeah. Great.
Financial report, Martha.
So we're ending fiscal year 25 in a positive position. We've held back a little bit more than we normally do at the end of the year. We're figuring right now between $15,000 and $17,000. The town is still closing out their year, and we're not sure if there's going to be any expenses that come our way that we weren't anticipating. So we just wanted to err on the side of caution. We were very excited that we didn't have to have a spending freeze this past year, and a lot of that was due to people really being thoughtful about their purchases and just trying to have a little bit more control over what was being spent. And special ed was our friends this past year, where we didn't have a lot of unexpected expenditures that drove costs up. I don't know that we'll be that lucky this year, but
That was then, and this is
yeah.
now.
But that did help us last year. Our medical expenses were slightly higher than what we had been projecting, but because we were on top of it all year, we were able to absorb the additional costs within the budget. So we were good on that. Just as a reminder, we're closing out two systems. We're still in two financial systems. So HR and payroll is still in New World. This is our first year closing out in Munis on the financial end. So it does, and it's for us and the town, so it does cause a little bit, there is more involved with it. So, but we are feeling very positive about things. The first 2 months of the year have been busy. with the multiple projects all across the district, and but things went really well. We were able to stay within the planned budgets for those things. We did just get a new truck this week, so that will help if we have snow and for moving things around the district. So we're very excited about that. We did a RFP for food service this year. We did get 4 proposals. We decided to stick with Chartwell's. I think we're going to see some very positive things this coming year. We have a new management team in place. They're very excited, and they've been responding very well to our requests. So I think we started some positive things last year, and I think that's just going to really continue this year. So we're excited about that. So the year's off to a good start.
Yeah, I'll just share with the board. Just winding back to a comment Lila made a minute ago about special education. We were confronted with a couple of most costly outplacements, and so those are going to gobble up most of the excess cost already right out of the gate. So that's a line we're going to continue to watch very, very closely. So we're in good shape now, but you may hear a month, 2 months, 6, whatever months from now that we have to freeze and move things around to cover other costs. So just be forewarned. That is, as always, the most volatile line in our budget.
Yep.
The Title 1, 2, 3 funds that we got, are those retro back to last year? Or is that just for this go?
No, it would be. The hard part with the government funds is that a lot of times we don't get notification until now.
Yeah.
And we've already planned what we're going to be doing. So that's what hurt us last year when they cut it, because we were counting on it and then suddenly we didn't have it. So this year it had the opposite effect. It was a nice surprise. But understanding that there could be a lot of expenses, like we're still, electric's still crazy. We don't know what's going to happen with special ed. We're keeping a close eye on medical this year. So, that we know that there's going to be expenses that come up.
Can I ask you a question?
Yep.
Are there any cost savings or revenue opportunities in the new Chartwell's agreement?
There are several things that we did negotiate in. So part of what we're going to be doing is replacing some of the older equipment in the kitchens. We're still paying for it, but they're kind of fronting the money, and then we're going to be paying them back over time, so that way we can have the benefit of upgrading now.
And I think with Chartwell's, and it's great to hear that there's like a new management team in place. And I think that while you're working with them, I think parents through the PTAs or some way to help get that information and those faces out to people, so they know if that, so parents and families know if there's, if they encounter concerns in the cafeteria, who they should reach out to or who they can talk to, and just to make that accessible. I know that I was at a PTA meeting last year where Chartwell's came and presented to the parents, and I think that went a long way and it was very successful.
Yeah, we spoke to the regional manager about this earlier this year, and the local manager just started this week, or at the end of last week. So I imagine he's got a newsletter going out to introduce himself. And then at some point, once they are fully established, I think we'll invite him to a meeting. We'll have him bring Conrad, our executive chef, and they'll do a little show and tell, and maybe feed you all some of their wares.
Yeah, and they're excited about getting out into the community and
That's great.
meeting everybody.
That's great. Any other questions for Lila?
Are we hanging on to all our reusable plates and forks and
We are.
no unexpected extra replacement costs so far?
We've been having a little bit of an issue with some tarnishing on some of the silverware, so we're trying to track down what the issue is. We thought we had fixed it last year. So we have had to purchase some additional silverware for replacement. Some of it just walks, doesn't always make it back to the correct bin. So there is always going to be a little bit of that going on, but overall the program's going well.
Thank you. And then we move on to the highlight of the evening. Growth initiative.
When's the last time you've been called back, Chuck?
Highlight of the evening.
He has his blazer on, that means it's serious.
Oh, okay. Hi, everybody. So tonight I have a lot of slides to go through, over 50. It's primarily results from last spring's standardized testing, that's state mandate. That amount of information and data can be a little overwhelming and perhaps even mind-numbing. So I'm going to keep up a brisk pace tonight. I'm not going to go over every slide. I've given you the information. If you have questions, I can certainly answer it, but I'm not going to go through all the levels of detail. It might be helpful if we listen to the whole presentation and then engage in discussion, but certainly if you have a quick clarifying question, please feel free to ask. I also want to point out that we provide this level of detail because prior board members found it to be helpful. But if there's something different that you would find helpful, please let me know and I can re-gear the presentation for next year. Okay? All right. So before we start, I just wanted to provide some context for the information that we're going to be talking about tonight. This is the chart. I think you've probably seen it before, our comprehensive assessment system. On the left-hand column, we've listed the different types of assessments that we use and the levels that those fall into. The top left-hand is the statewide accountability assessments, this SBA and the SAT. Under that are our own district interim benchmark assessments, the MAP and the PSAT. And then finally, all of our classroom-based formative assessments. And that's just a brief sampling of all of the formative assessments that our teachers use. Next to the middle column lists the questions that data is supposed to answer. So if you look at the top center column, the state accountability assessments answer the question, are enough of our students meeting standards? And that's designed for state and district leaders and boards of education. And it helps us to decide, basically, are enough of our students meeting benchmark? And how best to deploy human and material resources. The next two levels, which students are meeting which standards and what is next in the learning for each individual student, are designed for different groups of people to make decisions around programming, instruction, and most importantly at the teacher level, what's next in the learning for each individual student. The reason I'm maybe belaboring this a little bit is because we need to use the assessments for the purposes they're intended to serve, to answer the questions they are designed to answer. The results we're discussing today are not designed to provide anyone with the granular information they need to make specific program and instructional decisions. We look at other data for those decisions. These results will help us as district leaders to decide if the district is meeting its goals and whether resources are being used as effectively as they can be, or whether we have enough resources. Does that make sense? Okay, so what we're going to go over tonight is the SBA, the Next Generation Science Standards, the SAT, Advanced Placement, and College Entrance and Persistence. So before I actually get into the numbers, I wanted to talk a little bit about the strategies that we used to support academic achievement and development. I think sometimes the way we chunk information across meetings that can be months apart, there can sometimes be a disconnect between what we're doing to get the results and the actual results. So I thought maybe it would be good to start with, and you've probably heard much of this before, but I just want to remind everybody, what do we do to get the results that we're getting? The first thing that we do is we support teacher collaboration, which involves using all of the time that we have available. Program meetings, professional learning time, coaching cycles, and instructional effectiveness team meetings to engage teachers in repeated cycles of data analysis, planning, implementation, and reflection. The second involves establishing regular district academic goal meetings between central office staff and building administrators to monitor academic achievement and growth data, and to provide guidance and support with decisions related to curriculum, instruction, progress monitoring, and professional learning. The third refers to the SRBI process, scientific research-based interventions, in which we monitor students' rates of improvement in their movement between levels of support. And finally, we align components of the teacher evaluation process, teacher goals and professional growth plans, to the acceleration framework and cycles of data analysis, planning, implementation, and reflection. It's important to note that these strategies are mutually dependent. For example, collaboration is critical, but only if teachers are clear about what they're trying to achieve, in other words, what their goals are, and only if they receive the support they need to grow professionally, professional learning. And a point I want to make here is that it's difficult, if not impossible, to draw a straight line from any of these strategies to the results we get in a particular year. And so if you'll just indulge me for a minute, I want to engage in some analogous thinking here. So when we think about growing students and teachers, my mind goes to a particular hobby that I have, and that's gardening. So I like to grow roses, and I've over the years gotten pretty good at growing roses. In fact, sometimes people knock at my door and ask, how is it that you get these beautiful roses? There's a lot of things that I do to get the results that I get. You know, I use 2 different types of fertilizer. I use rose tone, I use cow manure. I spray them with different things, antifungal stuff, neem oil. Some of the roses need to be deadheaded. Climbing roses need to be shaped so that they bloom the right way. Certain roses have to be in certain places in the yard so that they get either more or less sun. So there's a lot of things that go into that. But I can't say, you know, if I get a beautiful blooming rose, I can't say, oh, that was the fertilizer or that was the deadheading. We do the things that we know are going to help, right? And many times it works. But there are things beyond what we do. You know, like this past summer, we've had a very dry August, right? Roses generally don't like a lot of water, but there's been too much dryness. So you see what I'm saying? Different things work for different roses at different times, and we can't always predict or draw a line between what we did and what we get. The only reason I'm saying this is because I know one of you is going to turn to me today and say, so why did we get that result? And I'm going to tell you, I probably am not going to be able to give you a definitive answer. We know what works. These are the things that work. And just like the roses, if we keep at it year after year, we're going to get the results that we want. Make sense? And I think you're seeing that. Our results are much better than they used to be. And it's because we are disciplined about doing the things we know that our students and teachers need to bloom. Make sense?
It does.
Okay, good. Thank you for indulging me.
You have to come to your
Go see
garden
your
now.
roses.
You need a field trip.
All right, so these are some bright spots from the spring 2025 results in terms of achievement. You know, our students continue to do, demonstrate very high levels of achievement and growth on the state's assessments. We're the top in ELA and math. I'll let you look through those if you haven't already. And these are the bright spots for growth. Again, we're pretty much towards the top overall in growth. Just as a final reminder, these are the levels that the students are scored on the assessments. If they score 3 or 4, they are considered to have met benchmark. So the percentages that you see on the following slides are the kids who have scored either a 3 or 4 on these assessments. So let's look at ELA. Right, so this is the current and historical data for grades 3 through 8 in ELA. You probably heard me say this before, but it's helpful to look at this data in 2 ways. One is cross-cohort and one is within cohort. And let me kind of, if you don't mind me getting up and explaining this. So when I say cross-cohort, I mean comparing 3rd grade last year to 3rd grade this year. Keeping in mind that we're talking about different groups of kids. It's the same curriculum, but a completely different group of kids. within cohort is looking at third grade last year to the year before to fourth grade last year, right? That's the same group of kids, but we're talking about a very different curriculum, right? Make sense?
Yeah.
There's pros and cons to looking at it both ways, but it gives you a more well-rounded understanding when you look at it both ways, right? Unfortunately, the curriculum is not, I think I've said this before, it's not evenly distributed, right? Some grade levels can be more difficult than other grade levels conceptually, right? You also have groups of kids who come to each grade level with a different set of prerequisite skills. So, fourth grade may have been easy for one group of kids last year. It's not going to be easy for this group this year, right? You understand what I'm saying? Okay. So, in grades 5 and 7, we have met or surpassed our district goal of 85% meeting benchmark, and grade 8 is knocking at the door. And in all but one grade level, grade 6, we see increasing numbers of students meeting benchmark from year to year. Those are the within cohort comparisons. So again, if you look up here, we went from 72% of the kids making benchmark to 75, 81 to 88, 80 to 77, that's the only dip, 84 to 85, 81 to 83. If there was an increase in just one of those grade levels, I probably wouldn't put too much weight on it. But the fact that the majority of these leads me to believe that our teachers are really engaging in those cycles of data analysis, planning, implementation, and reflection. Okay. All right, so the next few slides are taking that information from the previous slide. Wait, what am I doing? Okay. Why is this not? There we go. Just taking the information from the previous slide and breaking it into the various levels. Personally, I don't find this information to be too helpful. Generally, what we would like to see is a movement towards the right. We want an increasing number of kids at levels 3 and 4. We would prefer not to see a slide to the left where we have increasing numbers of kids at level 1 and 2. It's helpful if there are patterns here. Generally speaking, we are moving a little bit to the left, but I don't really find this to be helpful because it's very difficult to find a pattern. Make sense? Okay. So I'm just going to skip over all of these if that's okay with you.
Can I just
Sure.
ask a general question? When you look at this data, that includes everyone that took the test, even special
Yes.
kids who get services and intervention,
Yes.
correct? So it's across the entire spectrum.
Matthew, how do I go back? I wanted the dirt there, so thank you. Okay, so here are the dirt comparisons. We are at the low end in grades 3 and 4. Top of the dirt in grade 5. Grade 7 was tied for second with Easton, and we're in the middle of the group in grade 6 and 8. I want to remind everybody that third grade last year was their first year of implementing a new program. Overall, that puts us 5th in the dirt. Now we're going to talk about growth. So the SBA sets growth targets for each student based upon their performance from the previous year. The targets are calculated to ensure that students who are meeting benchmark make at least a year's worth of growth. And students who are not meeting benchmark make accelerated growth, specifically to close the achievement gap within 3 years. So our kids who are falling below benchmark have more challenging goals than the students who are at benchmark. But for the kids who are at benchmark, we want to see at least a year's worth of growth for those students. Now, the goal is for every student to meet 100% of their target, but in reality, some exceed their target, some others don't quite make it. And so this chart shows the average percent of growth targets achieved by our students. And you can see here the growth in the elementary grades is strong, but we'd like to see more students making more growth in the middle grades. I would like to also remind you that we are in the process of reviewing the curriculum for middle school, and next year they will be piloting various units from 3 different programs so that we can make a decision moving forward. Did I miss a slide? Well, overall, across all levels, we rank right in the middle in terms of growth. Matthew, can you make me go back again? I'm sorry.
I think you had the dark.
We wanted the DERG growth. Is that
That's
this?
pretty good, their comparison by grade.
So grade 5 had the best growth in the DERG. Grades 4 and 8 were at or near the bottom, and the rest were generally in the middle, which again puts us right in the middle. Okay, so this chart shows the performance of our students who receive special ed services and supports in 24 and 25.
Good.
Say it again?
Yes.
Okay. One more.
One more.
So this is the chart that shows the performance of our students who receive special ed services in 24 and 25, which provides a cross-cohort and within-cohort comparison. There are still some areas of growth for us. The within-cohort growth at the elementary level is decent, but we would still like to see more growth at the middle school level. This is the same data, but includes the actual numbers of students involved. You'll notice that these numbers are not large, which means even small changes, 1 or 2 students, can cause large changes in the percentages. The other point about students who receive special ed supports is that they are entered and exited into special ed over the course of the year. So the numbers aren't necessarily very clean, and makes it difficult to draw firm conclusions about overall progress. This is a comparison of students with and without disabilities. There is still quite an achievement gap, but I have to say that over the years it has narrowed significantly, and I think we are making progress. All right, let's move on to math. Again, this is the current and historical data for math in grades 3 through 8. And again, it's helpful to look at the data in 2 ways, both cross-cohort and within cohort. We exceeded our goal in grade 7 and are getting close in grades 6 and 8. And as I said in ELA, in all but 1 grade level, this time grade 8, we see increasing numbers of students meeting benchmark from year to year. And again, these are just all of that same data broken down by level. If you have time to dig into it, I stopped. If you have time to dig into that data and you have specific questions, please let me know. And here are the DERG comparisons. We're at the bottom of the comparison group in grades 3 and 4. We are in the middle in grades 5 and 6, and at or near the very top in 7th and 8th grades. Overall, we're 3rd in the DERG, behind Darien and New Canaan. Growth in math continues to be quite strong. You notice those percentages are quite good. Compared to our DERG counterparts, we were near the bottom in grade 4 for growth, 2nd in grades 5 and 6, and 3rd in grades 7 and 8. We are 2nd in the DERG in growth overall in grades 3 through 8 in math. Students who receive special ed supports, we made some growth for 3 of the cohorts. We have some work to do in the others. Again, this is adding actual numbers. This was something a prior board member felt was important because the percentages alone don't really give you a sense of the numbers of students that we're talking about. And again, there is an achievement gap, but if you look at our results historically, we are narrowing this over time. All right, science. So more students met benchmark in 2025 compared to 2024, and it's more in line with the 2023 results, back up to 79%. Really disappointing we couldn't get 1 or 2 more kids into the 80%. Grade 8. Grade 8 was interesting. We dropped in our achievement level compared to previous cohorts. You'll notice our performance historically has been pretty good. So we're wondering if the results are, a bit of an anomaly that is specific to this cohort, but we're going to be taking a deeper dive into our instructional assessment practices to ensure that we return to our previous levels of achievement moving forward. Another great year for Wilton High School. So, there are comparisons. Grade 5 and 6. Oh, I'm sorry, grade 5 was 6th in the DERG, grade 8 was 5th, and once again, Wilton High School was number 1 in the DERG and number 3 in the state.
Can I ask just a
Yeah.
quick question? Because that's like the second or third time that I've noticed that our lower grades across the DERG might be a little bit, lower in ranking, but then the upper grades and the high school kind of surpass and are at the top of the ranking. So I just, we talk about foundational needs. So it's just something that I just been pointing out, and maybe there's a question or something to inquire further or look into that further, but I just find it interesting.
I think what we could achieve if we could get those foundational skills up to the level we'd like to see. Yeah. I do think that the high school has a heavy lift sometimes, but it's getting less of a lift. I mean, Middlebrook is also really lifting the kids up a lot.
Yeah.
And we're sending kids up to the high school who are much better prepared. But I think you're right. I think we have some work to do at the elementary level. And I think that's one of the reasons why we moved to illustrative math, and also why we're looking very carefully and have made a decision to move to a different curriculum at the elementary level.
So just, that's just kind of what
Yes.
we seem to have a really solid recipe on the top, and it seems like we're getting there in the bottom. And if it just, and like each year you see it.
Yes.
You see it building, and at the top is definitely sustaining and continues to grow.
Everything takes time.
And they're young learners.
Yeah.
So we're just fluffing them up, and then we just keep moving them along, and they do more and be more and learn more.
I have every confidence that we will be able to improve our performance at the elementary level. Let me rephrase that. We will continue to improve our performance because we are improving our performance. Okay, so excuse me. All right, Connecticut School Day SAT. These are the results in total and broken down by level. Another exceptional year for Wilton High School. One thing I want to mention here is the benchmark for math is much higher than the benchmark for ELA. So I know we consistently see math seeming to be lower, but you need to keep in mind the benchmark is harder. And I think every school district has better results in ELA than they do in math because of that. And that's because of and Matthew, you might have to help me with this. Those cutoff scores are based on what students need to know and be able to do in order to get a B in their freshman year.
A C
plus
or better
in
freshman
college.
level. So freshman level math classes tend to be more challenging to score that grade level. That's grade.
Make sense?
Freshman college or freshman high school?
Freshman college.
Freshman college.
Yeah. Okay, so this is, again, that breaking down by level. So this is the DIRG comparison. We're number 2 in ELA in the state and number 2 in math, behind both behind Darien High School. This is our students, sped versus non-sped, which you can see we do still have some work to do. There is still a bit of an achievement gap here. All right, advanced placement. This includes the number of subjects tested and how our students scored across levels. Level 3 and above is what is needed to get credit, and we are above 90%, which you'll see in the next slide. This is the percent of students passing AP exams and the percent of students who actually participated in taking exams. And this is one of our best years ever. This is the percentage of students who participated in AP at some point during their high school year. So again, knocking at the door of 80%, which I think is a very good reflection of the rigor of the high school. And the last 2 years have been an historic high for success on AP exams, as you can see from this graph. AP scholars achieve high scores on multiple AP exams. Again, I think this is an all-time high for us, correct? Mm-hmm. Yep. And then finally, I think it's finally, no, the last test scores. So there has been a downward trend in the number of students taking the ACT, but last year was a bright spot for students who opted to take it and had historically high scores. And finally, these are the college persistence numbers. Students who enter college and persist, meaning they return from their sophomore year. The data is never very current, but we are near the top in both the state and the DIRG, which means we are preparing our students well for success in college. So sorry for the speed dating aspect of this, but I just wanted to get through and do the highlights. So do you have any questions?
Chuck, I had a question. More to just help me guide how I digest some of this information.
Sure.
If you can go back to slide 18.
Happy to ask you to do it. Which one was that?
This is ELA growth trends. What I was just curious, like to your point at the beginning in the whole analogy of the incredible roses that you small deviations or changes in the data, you can't really parse out much specifically. How much of a delta would there need to be for you to say one, like very positively or very negatively, that there's something that warrants a real drill down for you? And did you see any of those types of trends in the data?
I mean, certainly that dip from 5th to 6th is concerning. We all have hypotheses about what that could be.
Yeah.
The transition from 5th to 6th is tough always. But historically, we have not seen a dip like that, so I don't think it's the curriculum. The teachers are still collaborating. We've done all the things that we need to do. So I'm kind of at a loss as to what that could be. The good thing is that both Trudy and Karen every year dig down into this data very deeply, and they develop what we call the blueprint for unfinished learning. And they share that information with the receiving grade level. So they're both meeting with 7th grade this year to really look at this 6th grade cohort and what their needs are and what tweaks we might need to the curriculum and to assessment practices in 7th grade to catch them up and address that unfinished learning. So it's that's how we tweak things. We see a dip. We look at the data, we identify where the deficits are, and then we help the teachers think about how can we bring students up to grade level within the context of the current grade level.
Thank
Did you guys add anything to that?
No, not really. I mean, I think it's really important to consider one of the things we noticed in the math side was a dip from 5th to 6th grade, right? However, I've always directed everybody, you need to look at where that 5th grade class came in and how much 6th grade grew them. So even though they were at 82% versus 85%, they grew almost 10 points from the beginning of sixth grade to the end of sixth grade. So those moves are equally important. I think we take everything in a big picture context, and it's not just what are the instructional materials, what do we have to do day to day to ensure that learning sticks. And we've instituted a number of changes, K-5 and 6 through 8, to ensure that the students are really having the opportunity to stick with their learning.
Yeah, and the one that jumped out to me on this one was just the 7th to 8th grade cohort from 23-24 to 24-25, and like, is a 10-point swing enough for you to say, like, we need to figure out what's going on?
So that's growth, not achievement.
So
Yeah.
Right.
and so on some level too, understand we also have a lot of high achieving students. So if you go back to the previous slide and the number of kids in level 4.
Yeah.
So if they don't make 100% of a year of growth, they may still be in level 4. They just may not be as high in level 4. So they didn't affect that number to the degree. And not saying that it's not an excuse, but it's when you're at the highest level with kids, it's really
Or
poignant
difficult.
for us to make sure that they're making a year of growth also.
So like what you're saying is there could be a 4 being scored without a year of growth.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Is basically what you're saying. So
Yes.
you need
Yes.
to look at not only, it's moving both toggles at the same.
Yes. I would be more concerned if we weren't showing more than a year's growth for kids who are below grade level. So for kids who are below grade level, they have to show more than a year's worth of growth if they're ever going to catch up. So we tend to focus on, if they have less than a year's worth of growth, even if they have less than a year and a half worth of growth, we need to look at things being differently. And that's generally when we start looking at SRBI a little bit more carefully and seeing whether we need to maybe connect what the interventionists are doing more closely with what's going on in the classrooms, so that kids are more successful in the classroom.
So like circling back a little bit to Patrick's question about like what that delta would need to be, it's kind of like where you see if it's not as much as a year and a half, like kind of what changes, maybe global changes need to be reassessed or looked at.
What was the year that we went from 2 ELA classes to 1?
2 years ago.
Before last. Have you guys considered that as being an impact on these numbers?
I haven't noticed that, Heather. What I have noticed, Karen, you can weigh in here too. Our achievement in ELA has been pretty flat for a pretty long period of time. And that's why we engaged in the curriculum review. Did you notice a dip?
I did not notice a dip when we moved from the 2 ELA classes to 1. Teachers have done a really magnificent job of integrating the 2 courses, and their achievement has remained at relatively high rates. What I do think we have noticed as a department when it comes to the lower suppressed scores in grade 6, that is one of those grade levels where the standards are a little bit harder, and we have a replicable practice in grades 7 and 8 of fully integrating social studies a little bit more with regard to reading content practices, and that's a replicable practice that we'll be working on in 6th grade this year.
Yeah, I guess maybe I'm just interpreting the data wrong, but when you go from 7th to 8th between 22, 23, 23, 24, and 24, 25, it looks like it drops. Is that not an accurate reading of the?
I was speaking toward achievement, so I apologize. I did not look at growth. Can't see that.
Let me find it first, yeah.
So you're on slide 8.
You get back on 18. Oh, yeah.
Just go full screen.
18.
That's growth,
Yeah,
not
if you look
achievement.
at absolute
Yeah.
achievement, page 9, and then you track that. So you take the 6th grade in 2023, and then you track them in 24 and 25. They continue to improve their achievement. See what I'm talking about?
Yeah, no, I see Pat, but should we not be concerned about the growth?
No, I think we always be concerned about the growth. But I think your question was about the curriculum, right? And the
Yeah, like
reduction in
if they're,
amount of
if they're achieving less growth potentially because they're not in as much exposure. I'm just,
Gotcha.
So I think
Bring
that kind
that
of goes back to Karen's point a little bit about integrating more in sixth grade, the ELA curriculum between the ELA class and the social studies class in terms of you're seeing that being perhaps that is driving growth in 7 and 8 in a
Yes.
way that it could also drive growth in 6.
Could, yes.
In 23-24, the cross
Within
cohort growth is an improvement each year.
for 7th to 8th, from 23 to 24.
23 to 24.
Yeah, that's
7
the
to
one-
8 is
that's the
down.
one grade.
That one is down.
So is there any way to tease out from the ELA testing that's done, what portions of the ELA test they did poor on?
Yep, we do that with the blueprint for unfinished learning. We have a sheet that by target, whether we have exceeded or secured the learning or whether we've left some learning on the table.
So I guess I just, to go back to like the kind of global point from the beginning about, this is kind of from a board perspective, are enough of our students meeting, benchmark? And then looking at, resource effectiveness or level of resources. So I know that we spoke about the ELA changes that are, going to be piloting this year and looking at those and talking about perhaps, further integrating cross curriculum in the 6th grade. So I was just wondering if there were other changes or resource changes or changing levels of resources in different ways or additional resources that
I think what I'm most concerned about is the achievement gap between general ed and special education. I don't know that putting more resources, meaning people or things, would be helpful. I'd like to see us do things a little bit differently.
Okay.
And Melissa and I have begun discussions around that. I mentioned a little bit before, the traditional way in which special ed and intervention works is we assess students, we notice where their deficits are, then we start working on those deficits, hoping that somehow they'll catch up. I'm starting to think that that model might not be the best way to do this. Our goal should be to make sure that students are accessing the grade level curriculum. Because if we're working down here, several grade levels below, they're missing a lot in the general ed classroom and the gap just keeps getting bigger. And we see that in the data. It starts small in the elementary level and then it just grows. So we're beginning discussions with the coordinators and with Melissa about how can we, it's what's called just-in-time remediation versus just-in-case remediation. So very often we'll teach things just in case they might need it for the upcoming unit. We want to make sure that whatever they need for this particular upcoming unit, that's what we're working on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's kind of almost even being more granular than we are now.
Yes.
So diving down into more and looking into what they have at this moment and 2 weeks from now, what they're going to need to have. And,
Exactly. And that makes that
scaffolding around that or
It's much more
extra resources
specific.
around it.
To what they need to do.
And it makes the connection between what's going on in remediation and what's going on in the general ed class a little bit tighter.
Okay, so when they're sitting in both rooms, they're kind of within the same, working on the same problem or the same, in the same area.
At least the prerequisite skills that they would need to be successful in that unit,
Right.
rather than some prerequisite skill that doesn't necessarily relate to the
So
particular
it
unit.
reinforces each other.
Knowing that there's not a standardized test for social studies, I'd be really curious at some point to hear if the high school history and civics teachers or whatever feel that the middle school students are coming in prepared enough for those types of classes. especially since it sounds like you might be kind of leveraging the social studies curriculum to actually teach ELA because, we've reduced the amount of ELA
teach
exposure.
ELA, but to provide an opportunity to apply what is taught in ELA in social studies in a reinforcing manner.
I would be cautious about saying that we've cut curriculum or that we're teaching less. It's less time, time is spent differently, but I just, I think just in general, I think I would just be careful about how we, talk about the learning that's going on within, the amount of learning or the what that's going on in the classroom.
Karen and the teachers worked very carefully to make sure that we were addressing all of the standards. So we feel confident that we were doing that. The way we used to do it with 2 classes, it was enriching, but I don't know that we were addressing additional standards during that time. So
That's fine. I was just asking about social studies.
yeah, we can certainly ask the
Yeah.
social studies teachers
Yeah.
about that. I would point out that although there is not a social studies test, the standards do apply to the discipline of social studies, even in the SAT. When they break it out, they look at, do students know social studies content? Do they know science content? And the SBA, those standards are expected to be addressed by the social studies teachers because learning how to, for instance, write an argument, that's a big part of social studies. So they are intertwined and mutually reinforced. And we can make some inferences from the data we get from these tests about how important social studies is. I have to say, Karen has always told me that, the results we're getting, we can attribute a lot of that to the social studies teachers.
The topics that they read about on the Smarter Balanced Assessment are aligned to the content taught in science and in social studies. So if they can apply those literacy skills in complex content text, we're going to see better comprehension. And now that we're really focusing on building background knowledge from a very young age, we're increasing their comprehension capacity over time.
I think that's great for comprehension. I am more curious about the amount of focus we're putting on, like just the amount of content, right? Like how deep are we going into civics? How deep are we going into some of these topics that I feel like a lot of kids just don't know about right now? And if they're actually getting the time to do that is all. Because I think that a lot of times, students don't necessarily understand the history and what's happening in the world and things like that. So just, curious about how we're addressing that.
Great point. And in grade 5, next year, we will be adding a unit on the United States Constitution. The rigor in the 5th grade first pass of U.S. American history has really been lifted with the new standards.
So that's great. Okay.
And we could certainly share with you the social studies curriculum. We could come to the board and talk about it. I do think right now it's a critical component of our children's education right now. So having a good look at it, I think, would be good.
And those standards keep on, right? Weren't there new social studies standards put in place
Yes.
recently? So we
Last
had
October or the October before, I apologize. Those 2 years are blending together for me for obvious reasons. We moved from social studies frameworks to social studies standards. So I think you'll see a difference in that.
You could definitely bring like a workshop or something to the table on that, if you're interested.
And I just had, I'm sorry, I'm dominating the questions. Does anybody else want to go?
No.
I'll go when you're done.
Okay. Have we had an opportunity to talk to other districts, or have we looked at what other districts have done in terms of their switch over potentially from Teachers College to a new English curriculum, and if there's been a change in their numbers versus our numbers?
Anecdotally, I haven't discussed it one-on-one with them, and I wouldn't want to speak to their data. It's hard for us to decide what's impacting our own data. I wouldn't want to speak for them. But we know what the districts are using.
I think it's a little too early for us to determine what the impact is. Teachers, when they first adopt a new curriculum, it can be almost mechanical. And it takes a year or two for them to refine their practice and feel confident, and it kind of delays the effects. So I want to be really careful about making any definitive conclusions about the effectiveness of the program until the teachers feel more comfortable implementing it. And I would assume our counterparts are thinking the same thing.
And so just as a confirmation, right now, the new English language arts curriculum is implemented at grades 1, 2,
K-5 this year.
K-5. It'll be all the way through K-5 this year.
This year.
Okay. And then the middle school is piloting a bunch of different
They
ones.
are piloting 2 programs and comparing it to their existing program, evaluating the performance of all against the standards throughout the year.
Great.
And that the existing one, we're doing a little bit in 8th grade in terms of tweaking it to make the transition to 9th grade a little bit smoother.
That's right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So every year you come and do this presentation, and every year you talk about the gap between typical kids and special education receiving kids, and it's always like, yeah, there's still a gap, but we've been hearing that for a few years now, and there's no
Okay,
further
but there's a
details.
second part to that. There's still a gap, but over time we have been narrowing that gap. I would like to see greater narrowing, but it's hard. You know, kids wouldn't be in special ed if they weren't below grade level.
Well, there's kids in special ed for social emotional
Yes, that's true.
too. I mean, are we seeing a higher number of kids in that category of
At the
special
secondary
education?
level, generally, the students have more of the social emotional issues, and we see more learning issues at the elementary level. And I would point out, even if they've got social emotional learning issues, they wouldn't be put into special ed if it wasn't impacting their educational performance. They'd probably be on a 504 plan. There has to be an impact on their educational performance to receive special ed supports and services. So I do want to see us narrow the gap, but when we narrow the gap, the kids should be exited from special ed. I have to say, when I first got here, I think 10% of the kids were meeting benchmark. We're up to 30, 40, sometimes 60, 70%. So we are narrowing the gap.
Do you talk to other assistant superintendents of curriculum in other districts and learn what their secret sauce is for narrowing?
I don't know.
Let me answer that question.
Sure.
We have the secret sauce.
We have the secret
We have the
Exactly
secret
right. And
sauce.
I did the analysis a year ago on last year's data. I haven't done it yet for this year's data. But you really have to look at the growth numbers, and even in this presentation that Jeff just provided to you, if you look, not every grade level is consistent. 3rd and 4th grade really struggled, but there are unbelievable growth results for our most struggling learners evident in the data. Last year we had the greatest acceleration, I think, in the state. So when I look at the data, I separate out districts that aren't full K-12 districts. There's a lot of smaller places, around the state, so I try to do comparisons. We're one of the strongest in terms of closing the achievement gap and addressing our special ed students. And we have a ton of work to do.
Yeah.
And that's
And that's great that you and Melissa are, looking at alternative resources and alternative pathways.
I just had one other question, and if you've already answered it, remind me. One of the things I was trying to parse out is I've always wondered how consistent, and are we showing just consistent growth when a cohort leaves one school and enters another, and how performance differs. We don't have K through 2, so there's really only one comparison in this data set of Cider Mill to Middlebrook, but it seems like the growth achievement for math when moving from 5th to 6th grade is higher than ELA. Just curious, is that a trend that you guys look at? Is there any meaning in that, and how we're are we getting better at providing a more consistent outcome or quality of teaching in that movement from one school to the other?
Well, we do have a pretty consistent instructional resource program in math. And that's the illustrative math program, which has been implemented K to 8 now. Mm-hmm. That's what we're trying to do in ELA.
Yep.
I don't know, we have a K to 5 program now that's being implemented. one of the programs the middle school is looking at is that same program, which would then make it, a K-8 program. But middle school students are different,
Yep.
and the teachers would like to look at additional options. What I've said to them is I'm open to a different program than what we're using in K-5, but we need to ensure that there is a smooth transition between 5th to 6th, and then from 8th to 9th.
Right.
So,
So, and I think the pilots are going to answer
yes.
a lot of those questions for us, because they're looking at, carrying it through K-8, or what the results will look like when you have a transition to a different program. And similarly, some of the pilots in 8th grade are going to look at coordinating a little bit with the high school and what, having greater cohesion that way might do or look like.
Our 8th grade students are really performing at very high levels and that they're very prepared for 9th grade. In our curriculum review, we really started looking at 9th grade and how to kind of lift the rigor to meet them.
Yeah, that's another interesting,
That's a good sign because we're outgrowing what we've done in the past. I think that's a good sign.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Thank you. It's a lot.
It's good though.
It's good.
Very
Yes,
good.
we appreciate, our students also, we hope that they continue to look like your rose garden.
Okay. I get teased about that for a long time. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Next up, we have policy 514412. It's a new mandated policy challenging behavior prevention, restorative practices, response, and student discipline. It goes to our goals and priorities number 5 and 6.
Great, if it's okay, I want to look at both policies together.
Oh, okay.
Because they're companion policies.
They're what?
They're companion policies.
Okay, so we'll also at the same time look
Yeah,
at
so that's-
5131.911.
I should have actually put the
Okay.
Connecticut school policy first on the agenda.
Okay.
To make it easy. So here's the short story with this. 2 years ago, the state legislature completely revamped the bullying and safe school climate law. And so, whereas in the past, statutory focus was around bullying behavior and eliminating and preventing and responding to bullying specifically, and so the statute was kind of organized around that idea. The statutory thinking in the last 2 years has evolved, and so 2 years ago, the state supplanted all of that language and replaced the statutory language with language around restoration and safe school climate and standards for ensuring safe school climates in schools. As part of the statutory change, they required a number of mandates. And so one was that every school district adopt policy language that was mandated to be drafted by CAVE on safe school climate. And so what you have in front of you, policy 5131.911, is the state mandated Connecticut school climate policy. Ours is the same as every other district in the state per state statute. It's a positive change. And so the state, we think the legislature is looking more holistically at student behavior. That's something we've tried to do all along. And so we actually think this is, policy, catching up with practice and, very good intent. So the state required policy language. We don't have discretion around what that language says. It's there. Kim, you remember a year ago when we changed her position, she was kind of in the teachers unit, now she's in the administrative unit. She functions as our safe school climate coordinator. One of the changes in the law, at the time was that person had to be an administrator. And so that's why we made the change with Kim, that's why we expanded her responsibilities. Her primary job is to implement this policy and to work with the administrators and the safe school climate teams in each of the buildings to implement the policy. This summer, as part of our administrative training in July, we had Jessica Richmond Smith spend half a day with us to go through the new policy, the implementation of the policy, as well as all of the investigative reporting that we so we did that. So coordinating with Tim, our administrators and staff have received this, and we're working through the policy now. The regulation that accompanies this policy, that's drafted by Shipman and Goodwin, so it's their recommended practice that lives alongside the policy. The shift, there's some language shift in the policy. So the old policy focused on bullying. The new term of art in the law is challenging behavior. Again, which is I think for me it's a positive change because bullying is pejorative conceptually. The second piece that's really important in the change is an understanding and a response toward restorative practices. So in the past, the policy kind of required consequences. The law is now necessitated that while there are consequences, there's also restorative opportunities. And so part of the shift for us and for everybody across state schools is to incorporate restorative practice into the response to challenging behavior. Make sense?
Only slightly.
Only slightly.
So could you bring that alive more? Because restorative practice, I've heard the words restorative practices a lot.
Sure.
But I still don't really, like for a kid that's, you kind of mean to Johnny and you threw his backpack on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
What does restorative practices mean to?
Yeah, our resident experts in the room. So you want to provide? You probably had one of those today. I think that the intent is to provide an educative experience to help the student, reflect a little bit on his or her behavior and try to correct it through some measure, and in a way to make the victim more whole. Go ahead.
Yeah, we've actually been preparing for this legislation was coming. So anytime a student is sent down in all the buildings, actually there's a questionnaire that they go through that gets them to reflect on their behavior. So that's been implemented now at the elementary schools for several years, secondary now in the last year. So that's one piece of it. And so there's a continuum, like with everything. So it could be that own personal reflection. It could be a restorative conference that's happening with students who maybe got into some type of disagreement. It could be a restorative conference with student and teacher. It could be an educational opportunity. So it really depends on the situation, but oftentimes it's discipline paired with restoration because we know restoration is actually more effective long term. So
More pause.
Sounds like it would take more time.
it does. But it's time well spent because typically I can tell you in the conferences that I've participated in with students, that's something that changes behavior typically, which sometimes a suspension may not have that lasting impact because the issues may still be there. So you try to work through the issues. So long term, it may be a little more time, but long term I think you have a better benefit, which is kind of the impetus for why the state is moving in this direction overall. Preventative rather than reactive.
Do you keep numbers for how many times you have a restorative practice
We will be keeping
intervention?
that data now with the new policy in terms of restoration related to challenging behavior.
Yeah, and like the old law, there's some pretty stringent timelines around completing investigations, communicating with families, communicating with teachers, and so that was some of the work that we walked through with the administrators this summer, is just understanding what those timelines are, making sure we're using the appropriate forms for record keeping. So Kim has that all set up. And then later in the year, we'll find a time, we'll come back to you and we can report out on, what the practice has been, what those experiences are, what numbers look like, how many, and, some features of, maybe some of the responses. That you can, if you want another just kind of concrete look at potential restorative actions in the code of conduct for Cider Mill, Middlebrook, and the high school, you have kind of potential infractions, what the kind of disciplinary consequences are, and what the potential restorative opportunities are, and that will also give you a flavor.
Just, I guess while I'm reading it, is it my understanding, is it correct to look at it that now bullying is a subset of challenging behavior?
Yes.
Is that correct? So challenging behavior encompasses everything. Okay. And then, so like when you have these definitions in here, so like in this one, so I was reading, so it's like restorative practices, and then it talks about challenging behavior, and then it says what challenging behavior it is, and then it defines what bullying is. But it's not quite clear to some extent that bullying lives under challenging behavior. So the restoration, like all that work, lives within the full universe of the behavior. So I think that's when I was
Understood.
So I think that's what I just. So when a parent or somebody sits down to read it, that they understand that how the definitions apply across the board. So anytime that you see, if they're calling out bullying separately, it's just as a subset of the challenging behavior, and all that applies to challenging behavior also applies to the bullying.
Yeah, and I think too, in this case, and I think it's reflected in the spirit of the change in the law. There was a time where just about every mean behavior was labeled as bullying.
Right.
And, we knew then that that's really not accurate or appropriate. And so one of the positive steps in this change is that we're getting away from those labels. We still have an affirmative obligation to investigate thoroughly and to respond thoroughly and to, help, all of our kids be successful in school behaviorally. And so that's not different. And, again, that's embedded in the law as well in terms of how we communicate and interact with families around some of the issues that occur.
So because when I was just looking at it, it was like when I was looking at what it talks about restorative practices and then it talked about challenging behavior, and then when I saw bullying separate, I was like, wait a minute, does restorative practices also apply, in those cases as well? And so I just, that, and then I guess just the new kind of definition of bullying with that kind of, that involves a real or perceived power imbalance, that new element.
It's an important one.
And so that just kind of, I was just trying to wrap my head around really kind of what that looks like, or what that means, and do even kids really, in teaching kids what their behavior is or what it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, that might be part of the restorative response, but as these guys are confronted with those kinds of situations, they're trying to make a determination, and one of the factors is determining whether or not there was among others, whether or not there was a power imbalance in play.
Yeah.
And there's a wide realm. When we look at the power imbalance, it could be a group of students to one singular student.
Right.
It could have to do with socioeconomic, education. We look at all those factors of what may be playing in.
Yeah.
Have the teachers all had a chance to look at this, or is this all?
They get training every year, safe school climate training that they do. They have the choice to do it on the Friday before school starts or by September 30th. So that has all the new information in it. And then I'm going to each of the individual schools. I've been to 2 out of the 4 so far to bring that to life and answer the questions that staff have.
Yeah, and I just ask, and maybe I'm interpreting this wrong, but like to me, I just wonder, in a classroom where you have a student that is incredibly disruptive, right? Someone that's preventing the education of fellow classmates, and that may be because of special needs, that may be because of social emotional issues, whatever that might be. Are we able to leverage some of these guidelines to have a restorative practice around a kid that is really disrupting education. Right? Can we use this to say, hey, like you've really disrupted the education of every other kid in this classroom? Is there a way for us to implement a restorative practice that enables them to see how disruptive they've been?
I mean, I think that's something
That's the idea, right?
we're always intervening on. That would meet the statute.
That would, yeah, that's what I was wondering.
And then, we always look to a restorative practice. There could be discipline associated with that. It depends on the situation.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see when the teachers read this, if they kind of have that was my first instinct when I read it, right? Because it reads very different than kind of the bullying piece, right? Because it's just more broad around how we approach disruptive behavior in the schools.
Yeah, I know the Middlebrook, at least I think I was over there for an IELTS meeting a couple of weeks ago, and Janet was kind of walking them through it, and they were struggling around, some of the concepts and what it looks like. So there's a lot here for people to digest for sure. Then just the second related policy that was referenced, you just mentioned, 44.12, the challenging behavior prevention. So that's also a mandated policy. The language from this policy is CAVE model language, and the language is not statutorily required, but the policy is. And so we haven't had a chance to meet as a policy committee. So if there was some wordsmithing that we wanted to play with, as long as we're not tinkering with the the concrete requirements of the policy, we can play with the language.
Yeah, I think that's where some of the underpinnings of the making sure, when the definitions, making sure that bullying kind of is included in that challenging behavior. That's where I think some of there's probably a parenthetical that can be added to just clarify that or something along those lines.
Yeah, so just kind of looking forward, the Connecticut School Climate Policy will come forward for a vote at the next meeting. Just don't have discretion there. This other one, we want to play with, we can put that on the agenda for the next policy committee and study the language a little more carefully and propose some modifications if we need to.
Sorry, which one?
School climate policy, you're going to see again in short order.
The 5131.911.
Yeah.
The larger
And
one.
challenging behavior prevention, we'll spend a little more time looking at the language since that's not, the language isn't required.
Got it. So just a question on 951, Connecticut School Climate Policy. It requires us to establish a school climate committee.
We have one.
Is that one committee for all the schools? It's one.
So we had a district committee, which we're now gonna meet a lot less, and that's folded into the schools. The schools already have, I wouldn't say new, we're doing a lot of the stuff that is in here already. You've heard me come and talk about our climate surveys, and we have action plans. Those action plans now are due by December 31st, and we have to have them public facing, so that's really the big change.
Got it.
And Kim serving as both the coordinator and the specialist? Or those two different?
The principals are the specialists.
The principals are the specialists?
They are.
Okay,
Yeah, and that's
okay.
also in the statute.
Okay.
They've been school climate specialists for many years.
Congratulations on the formal.
For the formal recognition.
Yeah.
So we'll see this one at our next meeting.
Correct.
We'll push the other one to the policy committee for one just
Yeah, for
quick scrub.
full vetting.
Full vetting. And Kim, thank you for all your work behind this. And that gets us to comments from the public. Seeing none under future business, look forward to Tuesday, September 9th of next week for long-range planning. Just everyone note the time again, it's 6:30, not 7 o'clock over at the Zellner. And then on Thursday, the 18th, we have a regular meeting, and then again on Thursday, October 9th, just to the board to aware in the coming week too, we'll send out a schedule of some of the committee, governance and, policy and other, committee dates. Meeting adjourned at 8:24.